Victoria Sterling, CEO of Sterling Industries, witnesses Maria Santos, a night janitor, tenderly caring for her autistic daughter Sophia in the company break room after hours. Victoria watches unseen as Maria patiently helps Sophia through a meltdown with remarkable grace and love, never knowing that this moment would completely transform both their lives forever. Victoria Sterling's reflection stared back at her from the floor-to-ceiling windows of her 42nd floor corner office of the city lights below, creating a glittering tapestry that most would find breathtaking. To her, they were merely distant stars in a universe she no longer felt part of. At 53, she commanded an empire worth billions. Her name whispered in boardrooms across 3 continents with equal measures of respect and fear. Sterling Industries bore her family's legacy, and she had expanded it far beyond what her father ever dreamed possible. Yet for all her success, for all the accolades and magazine covers declaring her one of the most powerful women in business, Victoria felt utterly hollow. The mahogany desk before her was pristine, organized to perfection, much like every aspect of her carefully controlled life. 3 computer monitors displayed stock prices, quarterly reports, and acquisition targets. But her eyes drifted past them to the small silver frame, tucked discreetly in the corner. Emma's laughing face beamed back at her, frozen forever at 7 years old, pigtails bouncing as she rode her bicycle in their garden. 8 years had passed since the accident. 8 years since that drunk driver had stolen her daughter and left Victoria's world colorless and cold. Her colleagues often wondered why the formidable CEO worked until nearly midnight every evening, why she never seemed to take vacations or speak of her personal life. They assumed it was ambition, drive, the relentless pursuit of even greater success. The truth was far simpler and infinitely more painful. Home meant silence, meant empty rooms that still echoed with a little girl's laughter, meant facing the reality that all her wealth and power couldn't bring back what mattered most. So she stayed here, in this tower of glass and steel, surrounded by spreadsheets and strategy meetings, anything to avoid the crushing loneliness that waited for her in that sprawling mansion with its perfectly manicured grounds and rooms that felt more like a mausoleum than a home. Maria Santos checked her watch for the 3rd time as she gathered her cleaning supplies from the storage closet, her calloused hands moving with the efficiency born of necessity. At 38, she carried herself with quiet dignity, despite the exhaustion that seemed permanently etched beneath her dark eyes. Her uniform was pressed and clean, her graying hair pulled back in a neat bun, because even though she scrubbed floors and emptied trash cans for a living, she refused to let her circumstances diminish her pride. This was her 3rd job of the day, having already cleaned 2 office buildings since dawn. And tomorrow she would rise before the sun to do it all again. The Sterling Industries building was her favorite assignment. Not because the work was easier, but because the night shift meant fewer judgmental stares when circumstances forced her to bring along her most precious cargo. Sophia sat quietly in the corner of the break room, her 10-year-old frame curled in the chair Maria had positioned just so, with her back to the wall and a clear view of the exit, exactly how her daughter needed it to feel safe. The little girl's fingers moved in repetitive patterns against her worn stuffed elephant, Mr. Peanut, a soothing rhythm that helped regulate her sensory system in this unfamiliar environment. Maria's heart clenched with familiar guilt as she watched Sophia's careful self-soothing. Knowing that her daughter would rather be home in her own room with her weighted blanket and familiar sounds, but the babysitter had canceled last minute again, and Maria couldn't afford to miss work. Each missed shift meant less money for Sophia's therapy sessions, for the special foods that didn't trigger her sensitivities, for the mounting medical bills that seemed to multiply faster than Maria could pay them. She moved through her cleaning routine with practiced stealth, always keeping one eye on her daughter, ready to drop everything if Sophia needed her. This delicate balance between survival and motherhood defined every moment of Maria's existence. A precarious dance performed in shadows and silence, driven by a love so fierce it could move mountains, even when those mountains felt insurmountable. Victoria's heels clicked softly against the marble floor as she made her way toward the executive break room, seeking nothing more than a quiet cup of coffee to fuel another hour of work. when the sound stopped her cold. It was a low, rhythmic humming mixed with what sounded like gentle shushing coming from behind the partially open door. She paused, her hand frozen on the handle, as her eyes adjusted to the dimmed lighting inside. There, in the corner she had never paid attention to before, sat a woman in a janitor's uniform, cradling a young girl who was rocking back and forth, her small hands pressed firmly over her ears. The child's face was twisted in distress, her breathing rapid and shallow, but it was the woman's response that made Victoria's breath catch in her throat. With infinite tenderness, the woman began to hum a soft melody, her voice barely above a whisper, while her hands moved in slow, deliberate circles on the girl's back. She didn't try to stop the rocking or pull the hands away from the ears. Instead, she seemed to understand that these were necessary responses to whatever internal storm the child was weathering. Victoria found herself transfixed as the woman reached into a small bag and pulled out a worn, stuffed elephant, placing it gently in the girl's lap without breaking her soothing rhythm. The transformation was gradual but unmistakable as the child's breathing began to slow, her rocking became less frantic, and eventually, she leaned into her mother's embrace. The woman whispered something in Spanish, words Victoria couldn't understand, but whose meaning was crystal clear in the tone, the devotion, the absolute unconditional love that wrapped around the little girl like a protective shield. Victoria's own hands trembled as she watched this intimate moment unfold. Memories of her own daughter flooding back with startling clarity. She remembered Emma's tears over scraped knees, bedtime fears, and childhood disappointments, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for witnessing such profound maternal grace. In the face of what she was beginning to understand was something far more complex than a simple tantrum. The woman's patience seemed infinite, her understanding intuitive, as if she possessed some secret knowledge about navigating the invisible challenges her daughter faced every day. Victoria's chest constricted, as if an invisible hand had wrapped itself around her heart and squeezed, the simple act of breathing suddenly requiring conscious effort as waves of memory crashed over her with devastating force. She pressed her back against the cool wall outside the break room, her legs threatening to give way beneath her as she watched the tender scene unfold through the crack in the door. Emma's face materialized in her mind with startling clarity. Not the frozen photograph from her desk, but alive and animated as she used to be during their bedtime rituals when nightmares would wake her in the middle of the night. Victoria could almost feel her daughter's small arms wrapped around her neck, could hear that sweet voice whispering about monsters in the closet and shadows that moved when they shouldn't, could remember the way Emma would press her face into Victoria's shoulder until her breathing steadied and sleep claimed her once again. But this was different, she realized as she continued to observe the woman and her daughter. This mother faced challenges Victoria had never encountered, displaying a level of patience and understanding that spoke of years of practice of learning her child's unique language and needs through trial and error and unwavering dedication. The guilt that had been Victoria's constant companion for 8 years suddenly shifted, taking on a new dimension as she recognized something profound in the janitor's devotion. She had always believed herself to be a good mother, had given Emma everything money could buy, had attended every school play and dance recital. But had she ever shown this kind of intuitive understanding of this selfless presence in moments of genuine need? The realization that she was witnessing something sacred, something that transcended social status or material wealth, hit her like a physical blow. Here was a woman who clearly had very little in terms of worldly possessions, working multiple jobs in the dead of night. Yet, she possessed something Victoria had lost along with her daughter, something she hadn't even realized she was desperately searching for until this very moment. The ice around her heart, frozen solid for 8 long years, began to crack as she felt the first stirrings of something she had thought died with Emma, a maternal instinct that had been buried beneath layers of grief and guilt, and the relentless pursuit of meaningless achievements. Over the following weeks, Victoria found herself creating excuses to work even later, timing her evening routines to coincide with the night cleaning crew's arrival. Though she told herself it was merely curiosity that drew her to linger near the areas where the janitor worked, She learned the woman's name was Maria Santos from the employee directory, and that she had been with the company for 3 years, with an impeccable record and glowing supervisor reviews that praised her thoroughness and reliability. Victoria began to notice things she had never paid attention to before. The way Maria moved through her tasks with quiet efficiency, how she always had a gentle word for the security guards, how she carefully arranged the chairs in the conference rooms as if each one mattered. But it was the glimpses of her life with her daughter that truly captured Victoria's attention. Moments when Sophia would grow restless or overwhelmed, and Maria would seamlessly transition from employee to devoted mother without missing a beat. Victoria watched from shadowy doorways as Maria would pull out a small tablet loaded with educational games designed for children with autism, or produce a special snack from her bag when Sophia's blood sugar dropped, always anticipating her daughter's needs before they became crises. The depth of Maria's knowledge became apparent in these quiet observations. The way she understood that certain lighting bothered Sophia, how she positioned herself between her daughter and the elevator when maintenance workers used noisy equipment, how she had developed an entire arsenal of coping strategies and comfort items that fit neatly into her worn messenger bag. Victoria's heart ached as she pieced together the financial reality behind Maria's dedication. Noticing the carefully mended tears in Sophia's clothes, the generic brand snacks, the way Maria would eat only half her sandwich and save the rest for later, probably for another meal she would share with her daughter. When Victoria discreetly accessed the human resources files, she discovered that Maria had repeatedly declined the company's health insurance plan. Not because she didn't need it, but because she couldn't afford the employee contribution on top of her other expenses. A decision that must have been agonizing for a mother whose child required specialized medical care and therapy sessions that Victoria knew from her research could cost hundreds of dollars each. Victoria's fingers trembled slightly as she opened Maria Santos's employee file late one evening, telling herself she was simply conducting routine personnel reviews, though the lie felt hollow, even to her own conscience. What she found within those manila folders painted a picture of extraordinary dedication that left her both humbled and ashamed of her previous blindness to the lives of those who kept her empire running. Maria's employment application revealed a woman who worked 7 days a week across 4 different locations, cleaning offices from dawn until the early hours of the morning, with Sterling Industries being her final stop each night. The reference letters were unlike anything Victoria had ever seen in her decades of business experience. Written not with the cold professionalism typical of employment recommendations, but with genuine warmth and admiration that spoke to Maria's character. Mrs. Henderson from the downtown law firm wrote about how Maria had stayed late without pay to help clean up after a burst pipe flooded their offices, working alongside the partners to salvage important documents, never once complaining about the additional hours or the mess. Dr. Martinez from the medical building described how Maria had noticed an elderly patient who had fallen in the parking lot during her rounds and had not only helped him to his feet, but had waited with him until his family arrived, refusing to leave him alone despite having other buildings to clean. The facilities manager at the accounting firm detailed how Maria had quietly reported a gas leak she had detected during her cleaning routine, potentially preventing a disaster, demonstrating the kind of vigilance and care that went far beyond her job description. But it was the handwritten note tucked between the official documents that stopped Victoria's breath entirely. A letter from Sophia's former teacher explaining that Maria had requested a schedule change to accommodate her daughter's therapy appointments, expressing deep respect for a mother who worked tirelessly to provide her child with every possible opportunity despite overwhelming financial constraints. Each page revealed layers of integrity, selflessness, and quiet heroism that made Victoria's chest tighten with recognition of how little she had truly understood about the people whose labor supported her comfortable existence, people like Maria, who possessed wealth of character that no bank account could ever measure. Victoria's home office, which had remained untouched for months except for the cleaning staff, suddenly became her sanctuary of discovery as she immersed herself in research about autism spectrum disorders with the same intensity she once applied to hostile corporate takeovers. Her mahogany desk, previously occupied only by financial reports and acquisition documents, now overflowed with medical journals, parenting guides, and printouts from autism advocacy websites, each page bringing new understanding of the invisible battles Maria and Sophia fought every single day. She learned that what she had initially perceived as Sophia's difficult behavior was actually her nervous system's attempt to cope with a world that constantly overwhelmed her senses, that the rocking and hand-flapping were not signs of distress, but rather sophisticated self-regulation techniques that many neurotypical adults never master. The research revealed the staggering costs associated with autism care. From specialized therapies that could run hundreds of dollars per session, to sensory equipment, dietary modifications, and educational support that insurance rarely covered adequately, painting a stark picture of why Maria worked herself to exhaustion across multiple jobs. Victoria found herself staying awake until dawn, reading about sensory processing disorders, about how something as simple as fluorescent lighting could feel like torture to a child like Sophia, about how changes in routine could trigger meltdowns that had nothing to do with defiance and everything to do with neurological differences that required patience, understanding, and specialized approaches. She discovered online forums where mothers like Maria shared their struggles and victories, their sleepless nights and small celebrations, their fears about their children's futures, and their fierce determination to provide every possible opportunity despite overwhelming obstacles. And Victoria felt ashamed of how she had once viewed autism through the lens of pity rather than understanding. The deeper she delved into this world, the more she recognized Maria's extraordinary expertise, realizing that this woman who cleaned floors for a living possessed knowledge and skills that many trained professionals struggled to master, that her intuitive understanding of her daughter's needs represented years of dedicated learning, observation, and unconditional love that transformed challenges into opportunities for growth and connection. The piercing sound of Sophia's distress cut through the quiet hum of the building's ventilation system like a siren, and Victoria's blood ran cold as she heard Maria's voice, strained with worry, trying to soothe her daughter from somewhere near the elevator bank. Victoria abandoned her pretense of working late and hurried toward the commotion, her heart hammering as she rounded the corner to find Sophia crouched on the marble floor, her small body rigid with panic as she rocked violently back and forth, her hands pressed so tightly against her ears that her knuckles had turned white. Maria knelt beside her daughter, speaking in soft Spanish phrases that Victoria now recognized as calming mantras. But something was different this time. Something was wrong in a way that transcended Sophia's usual sensory episodes. The building's fire alarm had malfunctioned, Maria explained frantically as she noticed Victoria approaching, triggering a brief but deafening blast that had sent Sophia into the worst meltdown she had experienced in months. And now, every sound seemed amplified to unbearable levels for the overwhelmed child. Victoria watched in helpless fascination as Maria tried everything in her carefully curated arsenal of comfort techniques. But Sophia remained trapped in her neurological storm, unable to access the coping mechanisms that usually helped her regulate her system. Without conscious thought, Victoria found herself moving closer, her voice barely above a whisper as she asked Maria what she could do to help, surprising them both with her presence and her instinctive understanding that this was not a moment for authority or distance, but for human compassion. Maria's eyes widened with a mixture of embarrassment and desperation as she realized her boss had discovered her secret. But there was no time for explanations as Sophia's distress escalated, her breathing becoming rapid and shallow in a way that clearly frightened her mother. Victoria knelt down several feet away from the child, remembering from her research that maintaining physical distance was crucial during sensory overload, and began to hum the same melody she had heard Maria use weeks before, her voice joining Maria's in a gentle harmony that seemed to create a cocoon of calm in the chaos of Sophia's internal storm. The silence that followed Sophia's gradual calming felt heavier than the crisis itself, as Maria slowly helped her daughter to her feet while casting nervous glances at Victoria, who remained kneeling on the cold marble floor, uncertain whether to retreat or stay. Maria's face burned with a mixture of shame and defiance as she clutched Sophia's hand, her chin lifting slightly in the way of someone preparing to defend what mattered most, expecting judgment or perhaps termination for bringing her personal struggles into the pristine corporate environment. Victoria rose carefully, her movements deliberate and non-threatening. As she had learned from her research that sudden motions could startle children with autism, and found herself struggling for words that wouldn't sound condescending or intrusive to this woman, whose strength she was only beginning to comprehend. Sophia peeked out from behind her mother's uniform, her dark eyes curious but wary as she studied this stranger, who had somehow known to help without making things worse. Her grip on Mr. Peanut relaxing slightly as she processed the gentle energy Victoria projected. Maria's voice was barely audible when she finally spoke, apologizing for the disruption and promising it would never happen again, her words tumbling together in the rapid-fire manner of someone accustomed to making herself small and invisible to avoid consequences. Victoria felt her heart break a little at the assumption behind Maria's apology, at the reality that this devoted mother expected punishment for doing whatever was necessary to care for her child, and she found herself speaking with uncharacteristic softness about how sorry she was that Sophia had been frightened by the alarm. The conversation that followed was stilted and careful, with Maria answering Victoria's gentle questions about Sophia's needs, with the guarded politeness of someone who had learned that curiosity from authority figures rarely led to understanding, while Sophia gradually emerged from behind her mother's protective presence, intrigued despite herself by this tall woman who spoke quietly and kept her hands visible and still. When Victoria mentioned that she had been reading about autism and sensory processing, Maria's expression shifted from wariness to surprise, then to something approaching hope, as if she couldn't quite believe that someone in Victoria's position would take the time to learn about her daughter's world. Victoria's offer came tentatively, carefully wrapped in corporate language about employee assistance programs and company resources, but Maria's response was swift and uncompromising, her spine straightening as she politely but firmly declined what she clearly recognized as charity, despite Victoria's attempt to disguise it as policy. The dignity in Maria's refusal struck Victoria like a physical blow, reminding her of her own fierce independence before tragedy had taught her that some things couldn't be bought or controlled, and she found herself looking at this woman with new eyes as Maria explained that she had always worked for everything her family had and intended to continue doing so. Sophia watched this exchange with the keen perception of children who have learned to read adult emotions for signs of safety or danger, her small hand finding her mother's as if sensing the tension beneath the polite words, and Victoria noticed how Maria's protective instincts immediately shifted to reassure her daughter even while navigating this delicate conversation. Maria's voice carried quiet steel as she spoke about the importance of teaching Sophia that their worth wasn't determined by their circumstances, that dignity came from honest work and self-reliance, not from accepting handouts from people who might view them as objects of pity rather than human beings deserving of respect. Victoria felt ashamed of her clumsy attempt to impose her own guilt-driven need to help onto a woman who had never asked for rescue, recognizing that her offer, however well-intentioned, had inadvertently insulted the very qualities she most admired about Maria's character. The silence that followed Maria's refusal was thick with unspoken understanding, as Victoria realized that her wealth and position meant nothing in the face of this woman's unshakable integrity, that Maria possessed something far more valuable than money could buy. A sense of self-worth that no amount of hardship had been able to erode. When Victoria finally spoke again, it was to apologize for overstepping, acknowledging that she had mistaken Maria's circumstances for weakness when the truth was exactly the opposite, and something shifted between them in that moment of mutual recognition. A foundation of respect that would prove far more valuable than any financial assistance Victoria could have offered. Victoria spent the following days in a state of unprecedented creative problem-solving, applying her considerable business acumen not to profit margins or market expansion, but to the delicate challenge of helping Maria while honoring her fierce independence, a puzzle that required more finesse than any corporate merger she had ever orchestrated. She pored over Sterling Industries' organizational charts and departmental budgets with fresh eyes, searching for gaps that needed filling, inefficiencies that required attention, roles that would genuinely benefit the company while providing Maria with better compensation and the stability her family desperately needed. The solution came to her during a routine facilities meeting, when the head of building operations complained about the lack of coordination between the various cleaning contractors, the scheduling conflicts that left some areas neglected while others received redundant attention, and the ongoing issues with supply management and quality control that cost the company thousands of dollars annually. Victoria realized that Sterling Industries needed a facilities coordination specialist, someone who understood the building intimately, who had demonstrated reliability and attention to detail, someone who could streamline operations while ensuring the highest standards of cleanliness and maintenance across all 42 floors. She worked with human resources to craft a legitimate job description that required exactly the skills Maria had demonstrated during her 3 years with the company, creating a position that would elevate her from contractor to full-time employee with benefits, health insurance, and a salary that would allow her to reduce her other jobs without sacrificing her family's security. The beauty of the plan lay in its authenticity, Victoria realized with satisfaction as she reviewed the final job posting, because Maria truly was the most qualified candidate for the role. Having worked in the building longer than anyone else on the cleaning staff, and having consistently demonstrated the kind of dedication and expertise that made her invaluable. This wasn't charity disguised as employment, Victoria told herself, as she authorized the creation of the new department. It was simply good business sense to recognize and properly utilize the talent that had been hiding in plain sight. Working the night shift where executives rarely thought to look for excellence, Victoria's hands were uncharacteristically unsteady as she approached Maria during her cleaning routine 3 nights later. Carrying a manila folder that contained what she hoped would change everything, though she had rehearsed this conversation dozens of times in her mind to ensure it sounded like the legitimate business proposition it truly was. Maria looked up from organizing supplies in the janitor's closet, surprise flickering across her features at seeing the CEO seeking her out during the late evening hours. And Victoria could see the immediate wariness that came from years of learning that unexpected attention from authority figures rarely brought good news. Sophia sat nearby with her tablet and headphones, absorbed in an educational game about patterns, blissfully unaware of the conversation that was about to unfold between the 2 most important adults in her small world. Victoria began by explaining the company's need for better facilities coordination, outlining the inefficiencies and communication gaps that were costing Sterling Industries both time and money, presenting the business case with the same professional demeanor she would use in any boardroom meeting. Though her heart hammered with nervous energy she hadn't felt since Emma's first day of kindergarten, as she detailed the responsibilities of the new facilities coordination specialist position, watching Maria's expression shift from confusion to cautious interest, Victoria emphasized that this role required someone with intimate knowledge of the building's operations. Someone who had proven themselves reliable and detail-oriented, someone who understood the unique challenges of maintaining a structure this size and complexity. The salary figure she mentioned made Maria's eyes widen slightly, though she quickly schooled her expression back to neutral, and Victoria continued to outline the benefits package that included full health insurance coverage for both employee and dependents, knowing that this single element might be worth more to Maria than the increased salary itself. Maria listened in complete silence as Victoria explained that the position would require day shift hours, Monday through Friday, with occasional evening coordination meetings, a schedule that would allow her to be home with Sophia in the evenings and eliminate the need for multiple jobs that kept her away from her daughter far too many hours each day. Maria's silence stretched long enough that Victoria began to worry she had miscalculated again, watching as conflicting emotions played across the younger woman's face like shadows cast by flickering candlelight, her hands unconsciously smoothing her uniform, as if the familiar motion could help her process this unexpected turn her life had suddenly taken. The offer was everything Maria had dreamed of during those exhausting nights when she stumbled home after 16-hour workdays, too tired to properly help Sophia with her homework, but too proud to admit how desperately she needed exactly what Victoria was presenting. Yet accepting felt like crossing a line she had drawn in concrete years ago, when Sophia's father abandoned them, and she vowed never again to depend on anyone else's kindness. Victoria could see the internal battle raging behind Maria's dark eyes, the way her gaze kept drifting to Sophia, who remained blissfully unaware of the life-changing decision her mother was wrestling with. and she recognized the familiar weight of a parent trying to balance personal pride against a child's welfare. A burden she remembered carrying herself in different circumstances, but with no less intensity. Maria's voice was barely audible when she finally spoke, asking pointed questions about the position's requirements and longevity, probing for any hint that this was temporary charity dressed up as employment, her natural intelligence cutting through corporate language to examine the foundation beneath Victoria's carefully constructed offer. The questions revealed Maria's sharp mind and business instinct, qualities that had been hidden beneath years of accepting whatever work she could find to survive, and Victoria found herself answering with increasing respect for this woman who refused to leap at salvation without first ensuring it was real and sustainable. Maria's hands trembled slightly as she admitted her fear of depending on something that might disappear as suddenly as it appeared. Leaving Sophia's medical care and educational needs hanging in the balance, her vulnerability in that moment, more heartbreaking than any display of need could have been. Victoria recognized the courage it took for Maria to voice these concerns, to admit that the stakes of this decision went far beyond personal comfort or convenience, encompassing her daughter's entire future and the stability of the only life Sophia had ever known. Sophia had been watching the tall lady with the soft voice for several nights now, her keen observational skills picking up details that the adults seemed to miss in their careful conversations, like how the lady always kept her hands where Sophia could see them and never moved too quickly or spoke too loudly, behaviors that reminded her of Abuela Rosa from the pictures Mama showed her of the grandmother she had never met. There was something familiar and comforting about the way Victoria hummed the same melody Mama used during difficult moments. And Sophia found herself less startled by the lady's presence each time she appeared, even beginning to look forward to seeing her kind face in the doorway when the scary loud sounds from the building's machines made her feel jumpy and uncertain. Victoria had learned, somehow, that Sophia liked patterns and predictability, always approaching from the same direction and maintaining the same gentle distance that felt safe rather than overwhelming, never trying to touch or hug like so many adults did without asking, respecting the invisible boundaries that Sophia needed to feel secure in her own skin. When Victoria spoke to her, she used simple words and waited patiently for Sophia to process and respond, never rushing or filling the silence with unnecessary chatter that could feel like noise attacking her sensitive hearing. And Sophia appreciated this understanding in a way she couldn't articulate but felt deeply in her bones. The lady had started bringing small gifts that showed she truly understood Sophia's world. Not toys or treats that would overstimulate her senses, but practical items like a special fidget cube with different textures on each side, or a pair of noise-canceling headphones in Sophia's favorite purple color, gifts that made her daily challenges easier, rather than adding to the overwhelming input she already struggled to manage. Sophia noticed how her mama's shoulders relaxed when Victoria was around, how the worry lines around her eyes seemed to soften, and even though Sophia didn't fully understand the grown-up conversations happening above her head, she sensed that this lady was somehow connected to good changes coming to their small family. Most importantly, Victoria never tried to fix Sophia or make her act differently, instead seeming to genuinely enjoy watching her organize her colored pencils by shade or listening to her detailed explanations about why certain patterns were more pleasing than others, treating Sophia's unique perspectives as interesting rather than strange. The moment that tipped the scales came unexpectedly during what Maria had planned to be her final night of consideration, when Sophia suddenly looked up from her tablet and approached Victoria with a confidence that made her mother's breath catch in her throat, offering to show the kind lady her favorite pattern game. In a gesture of trust that Sophia extended to precious few people in her carefully ordered world. Maria watched in amazement as her daughter, who typically needed weeks to warm up to new people and often never reached this level of comfort at all, began explaining the intricate rules of her color sequencing application with the kind of animated enthusiasm she usually reserved only for her mother, her hands moving expressively as she demonstrated how the patterns created harmony and predictability in a way that soothed her nervous system. Victoria listened with genuine fascination, asking thoughtful questions that showed she wasn't just humoring a child, but was truly interested in understanding Sophia's unique perspective And when Sophia spontaneously reached out to guide Victoria's finger across the tablet screen to show her the correct sequence, Maria felt something fundamental shift in her chest, a recognition that this woman had somehow earned her daughter's precious trust through patience and authentic caring, rather than manipulation or false kindness. The sight of Sophia's face, bright with the joy of sharing something important with someone who truly understood its value, dissolved the last of Maria's resistance as she realized that her fierce independence, while admirable and necessary for survival, had perhaps blinded her to the difference between accepting charity and recognizing genuine partnership and mutual respect. Victoria's eyes met Maria's over Sophia's bent head. And in that moment, both women understood that this decision was no longer about employment or financial stability, but about creating a space where Sophia could thrive and where Maria could finally breathe without the constant weight of carrying everything alone. Pressing down on her shoulders like a physical burden she had forgotten wasn't normal to bear. With tears threatening to spill from her eyes, Maria quietly accepted Victoria's offer, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her, as she realized that sometimes accepting help wasn't a sign of weakness, but a recognition of strength in community and the courage to let others care about what mattered most. Monday morning, as facilities coordination specialist, when she walked through the Sterling Industries lobby in daylight for the first time, wearing a crisp business suit that Victoria had helped her select, her employee badge bearing her new title, and a photograph that captured the quiet pride radiating from her eyes as she embraced this unprecedented chapter of her life. The difference was immediately apparent in every aspect of their daily routine, from Sophia waking up in her own bed to have breakfast with her mother instead of being rushed to a babysitter, to Maria's newfound ability to schedule Sophia's therapy appointments during regular business hours without sacrificing precious income or begging for accommodations from unsympathetic employers. Maria's office, a small but professionally appointed space on the 15th floor, complete with a desk, computer, and telephone, felt surreal after years of working in shadows and storage closets, and she found herself pausing throughout that first week to absorb the reality that she had her own workspace, her own responsibilities, that were valued and respected by an organization that had previously known her only as invisible hands that restored order after business hours. The health insurance card that arrived in her employee packet felt like a miracle in her hands. Knowing that Sophia's monthly therapy sessions, occupational therapy consultations, and specialized pediatric appointments would now be covered under a comprehensive plan that treated her daughter's needs as legitimate medical care rather than luxury expenses they couldn't afford. More importantly, Maria discovered that her years of meticulous attention to detail, her intimate knowledge of the building's systems, and her natural ability to coordinate multiple moving parts made her exceptionally qualified for her new role. Earning respect from maintenance staff, cleaning crews, and building management who had always appreciated her work, but now sought her input on operational decisions. Sophia, meanwhile, blossomed under the new routine that allowed her to attend after-school programs designed for children with special needs, participate in social skills groups that helped her navigate peer interactions, and come home each evening to a mother who was present and energetic, rather than exhausted from working multiple jobs across the city, creating stability that allowed both mother and daughter to thrive in ways they had never dared to imagine possible. Victoria's healing began in small, unexpected moments that caught her off guard with their intensity, like when Sophia shyly asked her to explain the meaning behind the abstract art hanging in the executive conference room. And Victoria found herself seeing the splashes of color through a child's eyes for the first time in 8 years, remembering how Emma used to spin elaborate stories about the shapes and patterns in everyday objects. The ice around her heart continued to crack as Sophia's presence brought back memories of motherhood that weren't tainted by loss and regret, moments of pure joy and a child's curiosity and wonder that reminded Victoria of who she had been before. Grief transformed her into a hollow shell focused solely on corporate achievements and meaningless accolades. Sophia's unique perspective on the world, her ability to find patterns and beauty in places others overlooked, awakened something in Victoria that had been dormant since Emma's death, a capacity for wonder and appreciation that she had forgotten existed beneath the layers of protective numbness she had wrapped around herself like armor. When Sophia showed her how the light from the office windows created rainbow patterns on the walls at certain times of day, or explained why the building's elevator music was mathematically pleasing in its repetition, Victoria felt stirrings of the maternal instincts that had defined her identity before tragedy stripped them away. Discovering that caring for Sophia didn't diminish her love for Emma, but somehow honored it. The afternoons when Sophia would visit Maria's office became the highlight of Victoria's weeks, moments when she would find excuses to stop by and listen to Sophia's detailed explanations about her latest interests, whether it was the life cycle of butterflies or the way different fabrics felt against her sensitive skin. Conversations that reminded Victoria of the profound privilege of witnessing a young mind develop and grow. Through Sophia's eyes, Victoria began to understand that healing didn't mean forgetting Emma or betraying her memory, but rather allowing the love she had felt as a mother to find new expression, to flow toward another child who needed advocates and champions in a world that didn't always understand or value her unique gifts and perspectives, giving Victoria's life meaning and purpose beyond the accumulation of wealth and power that had felt so empty for so many years. The call came at 2:15 on a Wednesday afternoon, Maria's voice tight with barely controlled panic, as she explained that Sophia had collapsed during her occupational therapy session and was being rushed to Children's Hospital, her words tumbling together in the way fear makes language disintegrate into fragments of desperate need. Victoria didn't hesitate, didn't stop to consider protocols or boundaries, or the professional distance she had maintained with employees throughout her career. Simply grabbing her keys and telling her assistant to cancel everything as she raced through the city streets with a terror she hadn't felt since the night she received the call about Emma's accident 8 years before. She found Maria in the emergency waiting room, still wearing her work clothes but looking impossibly small and lost among the harsh fluorescent lights and antiseptic smells, her hands shaking as she clutched Sophia's stuffed elephant and tried to answer the endless stream of questions from medical staff who needed insurance information and medical histories and authorization signatures. Victoria took charge with the quiet efficiency that had made her a formidable business leader, speaking to doctors and nurses with the authority of someone accustomed to being heard and obeyed, ensuring that Sophia received immediate attention from the pediatric neurology team while simultaneously comforting Maria, who kept apologizing through her tears for calling Victoria instead of handling this crisis alone. The hours that followed blurred together in a haze of medical consultations and test results, with Victoria maintaining a steady presence beside Maria's chair, bringing her coffee and sandwiches she was too worried to eat, making phone calls to ensure Sophia's regular therapists were kept informed, and using her considerable resources to arrange for the best possible care without making Maria feel like a charity case. When Sophia finally woke up in her hospital bed, groggy from medication but alert enough to recognize the two most important women in her life sitting beside her, she reached for both of them simultaneously, her small hands bridging the gap between the mother who had given her life and the woman who had become like family through love, freely chosen rather than blood connection. Victoria felt something profound settle into place as she held Sophia's hand and watched Maria stroke her daughter's hair. Understanding that this was what family truly meant, not the biological connections she had lost, but the bonds forged through shared love, mutual support, and the willingness to show up for each other in moments of crisis and need. The revelation came softly in the dim hospital room as Sophia slept peacefully between them and her crisis having passed, but leaving both women emotionally raw and vulnerable in the way that life-threatening scares tend to strip away all pretense and protective barriers, creating space for the kind of honesty that normally takes years to develop. Victoria's voice was barely above a whisper as she began to speak about Emma, her words carrying the weight of 8 years of suppressed grief as she described her daughter's laugh, her insatiable curiosity about everything from cloud formations to why flowers had different smells, and the way she used to insist on reading bedtime stories to her stuffed animals before Victoria could read one to her. Maria listened without interruption as Victoria painted a picture of a life that had been perfect in all the ways that mattered, until one December evening when a drunk driver ran a red light and shattered everything, leaving Victoria with wealth and power but no one to share it with. No small voice calling her name, no reason to hurry home or plan vacations or believe in the future beyond the next quarterly report. The words came haltingly at first, then in a flood of emotion that had been dammed up for nearly a decade, as Victoria explained how watching Maria with Sophia had awakened something she thought had died with Emma, a maternal instinct that had found new purpose in caring about Sophia's well-being and Maria's struggles, filling a void that no amount of business success had been able to touch. She spoke about the nights she had spent researching autism not just to understand Sophia better, but because learning about this little girl's world had given her something meaningful to focus on beyond the endless cycle of meetings and mergers that had become her refuge from grief, admitting that helping them had helped her heal in ways she was only beginning to understand. Maria's tears fell silently as she reached across Sophia's sleeping form to take Victoria's hand. Recognizing the profound courage it took to share such intimate pain, and in that moment of mutual vulnerability, their relationship shifted from employer and employee, from helper and recipient, to something deeper and more precious. Two mothers who had found in each other the family they both desperately needed, bound together by love for the remarkable child sleeping between them, who had somehow orchestrated their healing without even knowing it.